I want to do a comparison on two bikes. One is a 2013 Kawasaki 1700. The other one is a Suzuki 1400 Cavalcade. It sounds like a kind of a crazy comparison because there's 26 years difference between the two. But hear me out before you turn the video off. The Voyager put the mirrors on the handlebars. The Cavalcade put the mirrors on the fairing. It doesn't sound like that big of a deal until you're in a turn. If you're going slow in a turn, maybe a 180-degree turn in traffic, and you're a little bit wobbly, you're not going to see much behind you with the mirrors on the handlebars. Whereas on the Cavalcade, even if you make a wobbly turn, you can still see everything clearly behind you. The Kawasaki handlebars, the distance between them is about 34 inches. On the Suzuki, the distance is also about 34 inches. On the Kawasaki, the handlebars are pointed out. The Suzuki handlebars are pointed down. And what this does is gives you a more comfortable ride because your elbows are in closer to your waist. Where on the Kawasaki, your arms, your elbows are kind of pointed out. The distance between the back seat and the front seat is about 15 inches on the Kawasaki. The distance on the Suzuki is also about 15 inches. But there is a difference, according to my wife, on how much room you have on the back of the Suzuki versus the room on the Kawasaki.
I saw Bret pull a tape measure on these two bikes, and I can only guess that part of the deal is that when he sits on there, it pushes this back. And when he's sitting on here, my cell phone will barely fit between me and the front seat. On this bike, there's a bag on the back of the seat here, and this seat rest was added. But you can see between me and the seat rest, there is a lot of space there. I can stick a water bottle or a 36 or 32 ounce strength, you know, one of the big ones from a convenience store, and it'll sit there and ride just fine. The Suzuki has an adjustable air suspension that you can adjust while you're on it and while you're riding. You can make it firmer, which raises the bike up, or you can let air out of it and make it a softer ride, which lowers the bike. The same compressor that adjusts the air suspension on this bike also adjusts the seat. This down here is for the actual seat bottom where you sit, and then these here are for the backrest. The upper and lower part of the backrest have air pockets in them that you can adjust to fit your back, and you can adjust them as you're riding longer so that the seat actually has pressure on different points in your body or supports your back in a different way. So it's a more comfortable ride if you're going to be on it for a long time. The Cavalcade also has volume controls and a tuner for the radio so that the passenger can control the radio and the driver doesn't have to take his hands off the handlebars when they're in traffic or something. The passenger has absolutely no controls on the Kawasaki at all. There's no seat adjustment. It is what it is. And another big thing for the passenger are the hand grips. Now these are not just important so that you have something to hold on to when you're riding if you want it, but if you're trying to roll the bike when it's not running out of a parking space or something, you have to have something to grab a hold of on these big bikes so you can roll it back and forth. This bike came with absolutely nothing. These hand grips came off of a Harley, and we modified them and bolted them on under the seat so that we could roll the bike. I mean, you simply cannot move these things when they're not running if you don't have these hand grips. Whereas the Suzuki, they all came equipped, every model, with these nice big cushioned hand grips. They're super strong. You can roll the bike easily with them, and if the bike falls over, you can even pick the bike up with these. Also, if you're hauling the bike, these are really good tie-down points so you can tie the bike down. In addition to that, these bars make really good points to strap on extra gear if you're on a long trip, and they run all the way back under the trunk. And whenever we take a real long trip on this, which we have done a couple of times, we've taken it out west, I have stuff strapped to these. I put our tent, our air mattress, stuff like that on them, stuff that's heavier because they'll support so much weight.
The Suzuki Cavalcade plastic is really thick. That's some pretty stout plastic right there. And it's like that all the way around the bike. The Kawasaki, on the other hand, the plastic is really flimsy, or at least it seems that way. It has this little bitty wire that holds the trunk, and when you have a bag on top of this trunk lid with all that extra weight, and the bike is already leaned that way because of the kickstand, then somebody really has to kind of hold it up. The back of the Kawasaki looks pretty darn sporty to me, but the back of the Suzuki Cavalcade looks like they stole the taillights off of a 1965 Mustang. It looks ridiculous, but the taillights are more visible, I will say that. Welcome to 1987. This motorcycle has the Peekaboo radio, complete with cassette player. But the radio does sound good. Usually when you buy these bikes, the radios don't work, and you have to send off for some transistors or resistors or capacitors or something and pop in these things or solder them in to make them work again. And it works fine now. The Kawasaki has a radio on the dashboard with controls on the handlebars. There are some controls for the radio on the Suzuki, but not as elaborate as what is on the Kawasaki. The Suzuki runs really good. It's a nice, quiet running bike. It has a manual choke that you have to adjust from time to time. Well, the Kawasaki has an electronic choke that you never have to adjust, but on occasion will fail to start because of it. This bike is not quite as quiet. It has a low rumble. The Kawasaki came with a heel-toe shifter, which I really like because I have diabetic neuropathy. But the Suzuki only came with a standard toe shifter, which tends to hurt my toes. This Suzuki is an LX. They made 3 models of this particular bike. They had the standard Suzuki and then the LX and the LXE. This is the LX. It did not come with any kind of engine guard or footrest, so we put those on there, and it's really comfortable going down the road. But you notice there are no floorboards for the driver. The Kawasaki did come with floorboards for the driver and also the passenger, and it has some highway pegs that no matter how you adjust them or how you turn them, they're never going to be within reach. And I don't care how long your legs are. It's the most ridiculous part of this bike. And I don't know what else to do for it except just fold them up and not use them because they're pointless. The Kawasaki has some air vents under here where you can cut air on and off. Well, the Suzuki has some air vents up here on both sides, and that really comes in useful on a hot ride when you're out in the desert.
Up in the fairing here, the Suzuki also has heat vents that you can open and close. And on a cold day, you get a pretty good flow of heat back over your legs and even up on your body because of the way it moves back. This bike does not have that. Now, it does have the vents down here where you can shut the air off, but these bikes had a heat problem. This thing right here has a fan in it, and the purpose for it is to blow the heat off the motor and down onto the ground to try and keep it off of your legs. Well, it works so-so if it's a really hot day and you're in traffic and you're going slow. all it does is add more heat down on the concrete, and it comes back up, or the asphalt, and it comes back up, and it really, really is hot on a hot day. This Cavalcade comes standard with a center stand that is designed to be easy to get the bike up on. You use this lever here, and you grab these fancy bars, which I'm not going to do it here, but when the bike is standing straight up, you stand on this lever and it'll push the bike right up on the center stand, which makes it easy to work on it. It makes it easy to check the oil, change the oil. We even change the water pump with the bike just on that center stand. The Kawasaki, it has no center stand at all. These footrests for the passenger on this Suzuki are also adjustable. There's a lever up here, and you pull that lever and you can adjust them up to 45 degrees. That's kind of good for shorter riders because you can rest your foot up here, especially maybe if you've got a kid or something. It moves that footrest up quite a bit and they can reach it. With the footrest in this position, if you're traveling downhill, especially downhill at a slow speed, or maybe you're in traffic where you're having to stop a lot, the passenger really has a lot more leverage to hold themselves on the bike to keep them from landing on top of the driver. I know everybody who has ridden up on the back of the bike at some point or another has slid up into the driver. Well, that angle on those footrests really helps you hold yourself on the bike. And that's just something that bikes today, they don't have features like that.
The Suzuki Cavalcade has an adjustable headlight right here. You can turn this knob and point the headlight up or down. The Kawasaki has no such feature. But the Kawasaki did come with fog/cornering lights on the front. The Cavalcade did not come with cornering lights or /fog lights. We had to take that set of lights and bar off of the Cavalcade LXE model.
The Cavalcade has multiple storage compartments that just are not on the other bike. One of the things it has that I really like are these little pockets up here on top of the saddlebags. It's good for, you know, stuff like some Kleenexes, some lotion, some chapstick, even hand sanitizer and stuff, because you want that kind of stuff when you're going down the road so that you can have it easily accessible. And you can open these while you're on the bike riding. You don't have to get off and stop to open these. The Kawasaki does not have anything like that. We did add the little bags to the hand rails that we added. They're not nearly as convenient as the little flip top in the top of the saddlebag on the Suzuki. Because these saddlebags are boxier, they are bigger. They're not all rounded and aerodynamic, but you can really fit a lot in these. The volume on them is probably twice what the volume of the Kawasaki is. Because these are all rounded, the lids are rounded, and the bottom of the saddlebag is rounded, they really don't hold very much. All those curves cut down on your inside volume. And half of the packing space in these saddlebags is in the lid, but most of the lid is taken up with the handle apparatus, the closure, because it's got that fancy spring closure. Whereas on the Suzuki, it has these clips on the outside. There's no closure apparatus at all inside the saddlebag. Inside it is all storage. The same thing is true back here on the trunk. Not only is the plastic thicker and stronger, but especially when you've got the rack loaded down, when you flip the seat, or when you flip the trunk up, it actually sits on the back of the seat, which means it's stable. It's not going to flop on over. It's not going to snap the hinges off or anything like that. And it's all boxy, which means you have a lot more storage room inside of it. You can really pack a lot of stuff inside of it. And it also comes standard with a little vanity mirror in the back and a light. So, you know, if you want to see how to put your hair in a braid in the morning, you can actually see what you're doing. But this vanity mirror is standard there. You can see it. It's really handy if you get a piece of dirt or something in your eye when you're riding. You can see to get it out. You're not trying to struggle and hold the mirror. On the Kawasaki, the trunk does not hold nearly as much because this is all curved and it almost is flush in the back with the bottom of the trunk. And like Bret said, it is so unstable. If you have a bag on top of it, you have to hold it because these hinges are not nearly as wide as the hinges over there, and it's not sitting on the seat. It's only supported by this little cable on one side. If they had just put a cable on both sides so that it was supported evenly and it didn't twist. The problem is when you've got a load on it is it actually twists the trunk and puts a lot of pressure on this back hinge. Neither of these bikes came standard with a luggage rack. We had to add the luggage rack to both of them. This one I ordered specifically to fit this bike because the trunk was sloped off. They did not make one that was original equipment. This is an aftermarket. It's some kind of name brand, I don't know what. But it is aftermarket because Kawasaki did not make one, just like they didn't make the handrails. We had to do other brands. Now this one, like I said, was made specifically to fit this. With the luggage rack that we put on the Suzuki, it was original equipment. It didn't come standard on our bike. We had to add it, but it was made by Suzuki, and we purchased it used and then added it to the bike.
The Suzuki has a kind of a square windshield, really wide, and that's great when it's cold outside, but not so great when it's hot outside. But I do like the protection you get from it. The Kawasaki windshield is not as wide, does not give you a lot of protection like the Cavalcade from bugs or flying gravel from cars or trucks. It's good in the summer, but not so great in the winter or colder months. Because Suzuki put the mirrors on the fairing, there's a little bit more protection for your hands from the cold. But on the Kawasaki, you can see there is a big gap right here for air to come through and freeze your fingers off in the colder months. So we ended up having to put some guards on to knock some of that wind off, which helps a little, but not a whole lot. There really are no accessories that you can buy for the Kawasaki. There's no place really even to put a cup holder. Not on the front anyway. Becky managed to put one on the back. It's not ideal, but it's better than nothing. So she has to pass drinks up to me, and in traffic that can be a little bit of a pain. But on the Suzuki, there's plenty of room to put all kinds of doodads and stuff on the handlebars. The Suzuki Cavalcade seat, the best I can remember, is about 32 inches from the ground to the top of the seat. The Kawasaki was boasting 27.5-inch seat, I believe, the lowest seat for a touring bike on the market at the time. So I drove from about Cumberland Gap, Virginia to Asheville, North Carolina to buy this bike, and when I got there I sat on the bike and my feet would not touch the ground, and I had a hard time understanding what was the problem, because it has such a low seat. But if you look at how wide the motor is on both sides, then you can see why your feet won't touch the ground. You have to sit on this thing like you're riding a horse. Your legs are sprawled out to the side. So unless you're really long-legged, your feet are not going to touch the ground on this. The Suzuki Cavalcade, on the other hand, has a real slender body, so the shortest legged person can touch the ground. Another reason your feet have a hard time touching the ground on this bike with such a low seat, and by the way, we took the seat apart and shaved it. We watched a video on YouTube how to do that. and we took off probably an inch of material. They put progressive coilover shocks on this. So you can add all the weight you want and the bike barely goes down. So if you buy one of these Kawasaki 1700s, just keep that in mind, that it's going to be rough at every stop sign, every red light, because you're going to do the toe dance at every one of them. So if you ask me which bike do I like better, that's a tough question. I really love the way the Kawasaki looks. I mean, it's sporty, and we've got a matching trailer, and it pulls it no problem, and we look like two far out old people going down the road in our motorcycle and trailer. It looks really good together. But the Suzuki has a far better ride. It's like riding in a Cadillac. I mean, I can't explain how smooth it is. There are a lot of groups out there of Suzuki Cavalcade owners, and they know these bikes inside and out. And if there's ever a question about them, you can ask them and they'll gladly tell you. We've never had the Suzuki break down except for water pumping. We were close to home. We drove it about 10 or 15 miles, and without a water pump working, and it never overheated. And it took us about an hour to change it out. Had we put one on before, it would have took us about 30 minutes. And it's just a great bike. I can't complain at all. We've had the Suzuki over most of the western states. The Kawasaki, we've had it quite a distance. We've had it out on the East Coast. And I really don't have any complaints except for the seat. About 350 miles is about all our butts will take on the Kawasaki. But we did 600 plus mile days on the Suzuki. And our butts were fine.
This is the bike to have for a long trip. And if you're bike shopping, if you're considering getting a big touring bike and you don't have a lot of money, but you want something that's dependable and that you can really load down, this is the bike. Find you a Suzuki Cavalcade. You can pick them up for around $2,500. I've seen ones with very few miles on them that have been in somebody's garage. If you can find one of these, grab it. This one, when we got it, it had been dropped on both sides, and they are a heavy bike. It's something, you don't want to start with this probably. You want to start with something a little bit smaller. I wish we had new plastic to put on it, but because they are getting more rare, the plastic is also more rare. And that's really the only problem with it, is that where the bike was dropped before we got it, the plastic is not in great shape. But even being dropped on both sides, it's still a very solid bike. And like Bret said, we've had it all over the western states a couple of times. Thanks for joining us. And don't forget to click like and subscribe before you leave, because we got more videos coming up, boats, motorcycles, whatever. And until next time, remember to put God first.